Tara, you gotta get up. Come on. I heard gunshots and all.
On a quiet night in Houston, Texas, an all-American family is ripped apart when a former NFL player and his beautiful wife are brutally murdered inside their own home. As more and more details of this grisly murder came to light, this facade of the picture-perfect family starts to come apart, and the family starts to point fingers at each other. It was a complicated case. A number of prosecutors get involved, including two that I helped train, one now a defense lawyer, who battle it out against each other.
Test firing a weapon? You know what his intent is.
Whatever the story is, figure it out.
Neither of these lawyers is going to back down as they fight each other, and they fight for justice and truth in the courtroom.
Houston 911, do you need medical, police, or fire?
I just heard 2 gunshots downstairs in my parents' room.
And your name?
AJ?
Any medical attention needed?
Yes. I heard gunshots, so I don't really know.
Did it sound like a handgun, rifle, or shotgun?
I'm not here for gunshots. I know my dad has 3. You're destroyed with that.
And where are you at in the house? Okay. Okay, they're asking you to step out of the house.
As HPD arrives, AJ turns off the alarm system as he meets them at the front door with his little sister, Kara. At that point, the number one priority is to get AJ and his little sister outside of the house and to safety.
The initial patrol officers swept the house and discovered there was no sign of forced entry. As they were searching, officers did not find anyone else in the home. And then they enter the bedroom of AJ Armstrong and Kara's parents. And they see Dawn and Antonio Sr., who had been shot.
As soon as I pull up, an officer proceeds to tell me we have 2 victims upstairs in bed with GSW to the head, which is a gunshot wound to the head. We enter the room. Closest to the door is Mrs. Armstrong, and I immediately go to her first. I just go to checking pulses and look for a chest rise and fall, and then once I didn't feel anything for about 15-20 seconds, I realized that she's no longer with us. Immediately after that, I'm walking around the bed to Mr. Armstrong's side, and he had a pillow over his head. I take the pillow off, and he's still alive. He's still breathing, he's still trying to live, so we go into rescue mode. He has blood everywhere, and you can see the entry wound from his gunshot wound to the head. Once we get Antonio onto the stretcher, I have a young gentleman come up to me. He looks me in my eyes and he says, "Is he going to be okay?" And you could tell that he was worried. He didn't say who he was at the time. He looked like a family member, and I just told him, I was like, we're doing the best we can for him.
While the police are searching the house, AJ Armstrong calls his brother Josh, who lives right down the street, to tell him about what had just happened.
I had gotten woken up by Josh coming in, yelling. I was half asleep still, like, what is going on? He said that his younger brother, AJ, had called him and told him that someone was in his parents' house a couple streets away. Josh told me to stay at the apartment, and then he ran over there.
The homicide detectives secure the scene and they look around, and they see shell casings in the bedroom. They also noticed that there was a bullet hole in the ceiling right outside the parents' bedroom, which was under AJ Armstrong's bedroom. They notice as they sweep the kitchen that there is a gun on the countertop that could be the murder weapon.
When HPD examined the gun they believed to be the murder weapon, they didn't find any fingerprints, but they were able to determine that that's the same gun that belonged to Antonio Armstrong Sr., and he normally kept it in a bedside table.
Also on the counter, there is a scratched out note that says, "We've been watching you for a long time." It's like something out of a movie.
That only adds to the mystery, because who would want Don and Antonio Sr. dead?
It was hard to live in Houston, Texas, and not know about the Armstrongs. Antonio Sr., who is an All-American college football player who gets drafted in the NFL, he parlays that into owning gyms in Houston. His wife is beloved in the community, and they send their kids to the most prestigious school in Houston, the Kincaid School. They're the kind of folks you would want to be jealous of, but nobody could be because they're so darn charismatic.
Antonio and Don were the greatest people, really caring. Josh and his mother had a great bond. The family just seemed so happy, so close together.
After the attack, Antonio Sr. was on life support for several hours, and sadly, he passed that evening, but he had never woken up. He was never able to say what happened.
Josh was so confused. People were very sad. Antonio and Don were just all around great people.
The police interview AJ, his little sister Kara, and the older brother Josh, who arrives at the scene a little later. Based on that interview and the evidence they retrieved from the crime scene, the investigators are suspicious about what happened that night. So AJ Armstrong is taken down to HPD and questioned into the early hours of the morning.
What's your first name?
Antonio.
So you're 16?
Yes, sir.
You know, we need to sit down and talk to you, figure what happened today, what's been going on.
It was like probably 1 or 2, and I went to the restroom, and when I came out, I heard the door open, and I thought it was my parents, so I like walked downstairs when I heard the 2 gunshots go off, and I ran back upstairs. And when I ran back upstairs, I heard somebody run out of my parents' room and like hit the door. And then I don't know how they got out.
Well, did you physically see somebody? Or?
No, like, I saw him running. So I just took off back upstairs and went straight to my closet. And that's when I called 911. I just like personally felt bad because like I saw the guy. Like I feel like I should have done something.
Okay, when you called 911, there's just so much that doesn't match.
In a 16-minute 911 tape, he never mentions that there is a masked man in the house. Then hours later, in his statement says, "Oh, there was a masked man in the house and I saw him running."
You know, ultimately, we need to figure out what happened today. When you start having inconsistencies,
Exactly.
It starts making it tough. Because now we're at a loss of trust.
Josh recently had found out that he was not biological to Antonio Sr. Antonio was a stepdad. He felt like he was kind of the black sheep of the family.
Investigators noticed a burn mark at the top of the stairs.
That was his first attempt to kill his parents.
While AJ Armstrong Jr. is at HPD being questioned about the murder of his parents, AJ makes the surprising admission that he saw the suspect leaving his parents' bedroom.
What did he look like?
I mean, they had it was like a mask. You could only see the eyes and the mouth, but he looked like a black guy, but I'm not like 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure it was an African American.
In a 16-minute 911 tape, he never mentions that there is a masked man in the house. Then hours later, in his statement says, "Oh, there was a masked man in the house and I saw him running." That just doesn't add up.
Does your dad own a gun?
Yes, he does. He has his case in one of his drawers, and like my dad, his drawers, the closet, and under the bed is like off limits, so like, I've never gone in there or like seen it or anything like that.
You know, when we're in the study that leads to your dad's room.
Right.
In there, when you look up, there's a bullet hole in the ceiling that comes from your bedroom.
Bullet hole in the ceiling.
Yeah, that comes through the floor. And then on the floor, there's an actual bullet that was actually fired.
I can explain the gun from the room upstairs. It was like 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. Me and one of my friends was just like playing around. Hey, like, have you ever shot a gun before? And I like went and checked the 3 places, and the gun was under my dad's bed. I laid my pillow thinking like that would stop it, but I guess it did not stop it.
Yeah. Now, see, and that kind of goes back to what we were saying just a minute ago. You said that you haven't seen it, and then now we kind of give you a little more, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of the time to clear it up.
Deactivate the alarm before you unlock the door for the officers?
Yes.
And you see, and that's kind of where we're at, that dilemma where, you know, it's just several things that aren't lining up.
Right.
You know, you had to unlock the door to get out, the back door's locked, everything's locked.
Right.
The house is completely secured with locks and with an alarm system. Your brother Josh isn't even there. He's down the street at his place.
Your sister's asleep.
So that only leaves you.
I had nothing to do with this.
HPD pays very close attention to the statement and the details of what A.J. Armstrong tells him that night. That, along with the 911 call that A.J. made that night, and all of the other things that HPD saw with their own eyes at the scene, A.J.'s story didn't add up. On top of that, the gun that was recovered at the crime scene that belonged to Antonio Sr. was tested, and they were able to identify that as being the gun that fired the bullets into Antonio and Dawn's bodies. Based on all that they learned, they arrested A.J. Armstrong, and he was subsequently indicted for capital murder.
The family was completely behind A.J. since day one. And Josh was very angry. He said they have the wrong person. He didn't do this.
I remember when this case happened because the school where AJ went is where my daughter Samantha went to school, and my daughter Kelsey went to school with Josh at St. Francis. So we all knew the kids, the boys, we all knew of the parents. Everybody knew somebody involved in this case, whether it was the defendant or one of the victims.
At Antonio and Dawn's funeral, I could really see how much so many people cared about them. People were very sad. It was really hard to see Josh like that. I've never seen anybody that sad and that hurt. I just remember he was crying for a long time, and I didn't really know what to do other than just be there for him.
I was brought in to represent AJ when Chris Collins, my co-counsel in this case, called me. Chris Collins was Antonio Sr.'s personal lawyer. When I spoke with AJ's family members about AJ and I learned about AJ, I was like, there's no way this kid could have committed this crime. It just doesn't make any sense.
Rick DeToto is now a very well-known defense attorney, but before that, he worked at the DA's office, and that's where I first met him. He was like this stud guy walking around, real cocky, not intimidated by anyone. When I heard that A.J. Armstrong hired Rick DeToto as his lawyer, I thought, ooh, good move.
AJ's initially charged in juvenile court, and one of the things that prosecutors in juvenile court can do in Texas is determine if they want to certify someone as an adult. Prosecutor filed a petition to certify him. We had a hearing. The judge in the juvenile court certified him as an adult.
Because A.J. Armstrong was only 16 years old, he is able to be released on bond, and he's placed in the custody of his grandmother, Kay Winston. Before the trial, there's still evidence that can be gathered and collected to get the case even tighter and cleaner and stronger. In the weeks following the murder, HPD begins putting together its case, along with the prosecutors, which includes the evidence they retrieved from the crime scene, as well as the alarm records and cell phone data.
Text messages showed that the family relationship from the outside it's perceived as good, but it was volatile from within. Through the text messages, we learned that there were issues between AJ and his parents. There were events leading up to the night of the murders. He was using money on drugs. And more than anything, I think his mother was upset by the constant lying. It was a boiling pot from within inside the four walls of that house.
But it's actually A.J. Armstrong's actions the days before this murder that was one big piece of our puzzle to point to one direction of who killed the Armstrongs.
He fired a gun in his room through 2 pillows down to the 2nd floor. Also, investigators notice a burn mark at the top of the stairs. Now, it smells like gasoline on the carpet. AJ said he had just dropped a match. Well, when you look at it, clearly that is not what would happen if somebody just dropped a match. They found a bottle in his room. They tested it and it came back to having gasoline inside the bottle.
If you look at where that burn mark is, it's at the top of the staircase, right outside his parents' bedroom. And so if that lights up the house, the parents can't get out. And in fact, Dawn sends a text message to her other son, Josh, who lives down the street, saying, AJ tried to burn the house down. It's no surprise when you put it all together that he ended up in that bedroom shooting both his parents.
Defense attorney Rick DeToto says the 16-year-old is a victim in this case, not the perpetrator.
He's a great kid from a good family, and there's absolutely no motive why this happened. It doesn't make sense.
It was really a brilliant, I believe, move on the part of the defense attorney is to try this case out into the public before it ever hit the courtroom.
That created a feeling in the community of, is this kid being railroaded?
While A.J. Armstrong has the support of most everyone in his family, especially his grandparents, that same family turns on, surprisingly, another member of their very own family.
Josh recently had found out that Antonio was his stepdad. And when Josh found out that he was not biological to Antonio Sr., it affected him. According to the family, there was some jealousy with Josh, the way they were treating AJ and the way they were treating Kayra, and how he felt like he was kind of the black sheep of the family. So we presented Josh Armstrong as an alternative suspect in this case.
In the months leading up to the trial, A.J. Armstrong's defense lawyer, Rick DeToto, made all kinds of statements in the news that A.J.'s half-brother, Josh Armstrong, could be the true killer.
The defense's strategy was to present Josh as the black sheep of the family, the half-brother, not even fully related to Antonio Armstrong Sr., not blood.
Before the murders, they spoke every single day. They loved Josh, and Josh loved them. That was his real dad to him. Josh and I had been together for a little bit over a year before the murders. We met in college. We just connected so well. And probably within that month, we started dating. But Josh's behavior after the murders completely changed. At first, it was just depression, but then a week or two later is when I started seeing the paranoia come out. He felt that if somebody went after the parents, what's to stop them from going after him and I? I don't think that Josh knew his family was saying that he's the one who did it.
Despite all of the defense's theories that Josh Armstrong was the true killer, he was never truly considered a suspect by HPD because at the time of the murder, Josh always had a hard, firm alibi that he was with his girlfriend, Hannah.
Lead prosecutor was John Brewer. He was assisted by Fareen Ansari and also Lester Blizzard. The prosecution leaned a lot into motive. They were trying to get into the mind of A.J. Armstrong. They are presenting a lot of evidence regarding grades and drug use and the taking away of vehicles, trying to pin basically the motive in front of the jury as to why A.J. Armstrong killed both of his parents.
He had failed out of the prestigious Kincaid School. His car was taken away from him and he couldn't see his girlfriend. To a teenager, that's their entire world.
The people who took all these things away from him, they ended up dead. Other than motive, the strongest evidence the prosecution has are his actions leading up to the murder. The prosecution is also presenting a lot of evidence regarding the alarm records.
The records said that the night of the murders, the alarm was set, the door was locked, there was no sign of forced entry.
So the prosecution was arguing because the alarm system was on and the records showed that no one came in or came out, that there was no way anyone else could have done it except for AJ. What they didn't know was that Josh had access to the house, and we had an alarm expert that could show that the way the zones were set up in that house, the door coming into the garage, if it was cracked, we had testimony from the witnesses that that door frequently wouldn't close all the way, it would leave the front door open, meaning that you could open and close the door without the alarm going off. And we were able to call that expert during the trial to show that that's a problem with the alarm system in a way someone could get in and out and not trigger the alarm.
Even though it's unlikely that two doors would have been open at the same time so that the alarm wouldn't go off, the defense was able to point out that nobody had actually looked into that possibility, because they said from the beginning, HPD zeroed in on AJ as their only suspect.
In 11 minutes of going into that house, before anything, they made up their mind, he did it. There's no physical evidence that ties AJ to the homicide. There's no DNA, there's no blood, there's no hair fibers, there's nothing. There's no blood on the gun, there's no blood in his room, there's no blood on his clothes. There was no physical evidence in a very bloody scene in the bedroom that linked AJ to the crime except his presence in the house.
The jury deliberates for several days, and they're unable to reach a verdict. Trial comes back as a mistrial. There were 8 jurors who believed he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and there were 4 who didn't believe the state proved it beyond a reasonable doubt.
It was that trial team's belief that the jurors were saying, it's not like we don't think he did it, but there were people in the room that knew the consequences, that they were going to send someone to prison for the rest of their life on a crime they did at 16. And with the family supporting him and people believing in him, they just emotionally couldn't do it.
I was very relieved. Anytime our clients get to go home is a good day, but I also knew it was going to come back.
When a jury is hung and a mistrial is declared, the usual answer is, we're going to try it again. The difference in this case is that you have the family of the victims, who also happen to be the family of the defendant. They do not believe the case should be tried again.
We can't move on with our lives, and we can't forget what we've been through.
With all that pressure coming to bear on the DA's office, what's going to happen next? When the trial against A.J. Armstrong for the murder of his parents was hung and a mistrial was declared, the DA's office makes the decision to try the case for a second time, because when you have 2 people who are murdered and the state of the evidence points to one suspect, you're going to try that case again.
After that first trial, some of the trial team had gone to other DA's office, and so they were looking for a new team to try the case. I had picked up the case in between trial 1 and trial 2. I knew that it was a very contested case, and so I knew it was going to be an uphill battle when I took over the case.
And Ryan asked me to join him to try the case for the second trial.
This is already a very compelling case, and it's captured all of our attention. I'm especially paying attention to it because I know the lawyers so well. Both John Jordan and Rick DeToto worked at the DA's office, and I helped train them. John Jordan's style is a little more dramatic. He very much likes the whole theater courtroom part of a trial. And knowing those guys, they are both very ready to duke it out against each other in the courtroom.
I have a great deal of respect for Rick DeToto. He is a tremendous advocate. Juries love him. The problem is, we had the truth on our side. We kind of went into the second trial, even though we were kind of new. We didn't know the case like the defense team who had had it since day one. We're like, okay, well, we just have to get a better jury, and the evidence is great. And so we're going to try the case somewhat similarly. And we trust the evidence enough that we are confident that we're going to get a guilty verdict.
It's now 3 years later since the first trial, and in that time, A.J. Armstrong has grown up. He is now married to his longtime girlfriend, Kate. He has a son of his own. He looks a lot older. This is going to be a whole different kind of appearance that he portrays in front of a jury this time compared to last time.
In the opening statement, we recognize it's hard for rational, non-sociopathic people to get their head around the idea of what seems like normal teenage problems can lead to homicide. So what we did is we told the jury is you may never know why he did it, but you're going to be very confident and know he did it based on the evidence.
So we stuck to his actions, his words, and the alarm records.
In the first trial, the defense claimed that doors could be open and the alarm not go off. And it is the state's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the night of the murders, that house was secure.
The alarm system is complex. And what we learned is in the first trial, neither the state nor the defense had the complete records. They had records from ADT alarm system. ADT is the hardware side of this case, but they contract with a software company who monitors those records, and that company is Alarm.com. And so when we got Alarm.com's records prior to trial 2, we see now that there is way more activity that can be determined within the records, showing that nobody went in and out of the house and that the alarm system did not trigger, did not go off the night of the murders.
So we had an expert from ADT to explain the alarm.
My co-counsel, Chris Collins, was able to determine on cross-examination that there was a minimum of like 77 errors in the records of the alarm system. Chris was able to go step by step with that alarm expert and show to the jury that the records weren't accurate. And it was difficult to argue that no one could have gotten in and no one could have gotten out.
The defense really leaned into Josh in the second trial. In the first trial, they throw him out as a possible suspect. By the time trial 2 comes around, they have put all their cards in the Josh Armstrong basket as an alternate suspect.
What we brought to the second trial that we didn't bring in the first trial was we got additional records regarding the alternative suspect's mental health history, and these records were extremely detailed. We needed to present them to show the jury that the mental health issues occurred before the murders, not just after.
This is the only case I've ever tried in my career where we had to essentially be a prosecutor and a defense attorney in the same trial. We are fighting to convict somebody we know is guilty, and at the same time, fighting to exonerate somebody we know is innocent.
What we had to deal with in the second trial that the first team didn't is the court had ruled that they could put forward Josh Armstrong's mental illness as an alternative suspect theory. Not only did we have a very good expert witness to rebut that in a psychiatrist, but we had the person who knew Josh the best, his live-in girlfriend, Hannah Pallon.
Hannah Pallon testifies as to where Josh was the night of the murders, and she also provided a lot of correcting the things the family was trying to portray about Josh.
I testified at the trial because I felt like I needed to be the one to say, this is all not right. Josh was never like this before this happened, before his parents were killed. There was never any sign of mental illness. There was no sign of depression. He had a bright future. He loved his family. And what AJ's lawyers did up there was disgusting.
Watching how all this played out, the way she brought it to life for the jury, the way she defended the honor of Josh, good for her. Good for her. I hope she's proud of herself, because we all are.
When the jury went out for deliberations in the second trial, I was as confident as I always am. And as the deliberations lingered and as it went on and on, started getting worried. They came back. They too could not reach a verdict. And I felt like I had been punched in the gut.
But this time it flipped. It went from 8 not guilty to 4 guilty.
So when they came back and there were more jurors for not guilty than guilty, it was tough to recover from that.
It is. It's somewhat humiliating. We're going in the wrong direction. I mean, what are we doing here? It was devastating.
After that second trial ended in a hung jury, you have 2 prosecutors who've just lost trial number 2, and a decision has to be made. Do we try this case for a third time? The elected DA is the person who makes that decision. So when John Jordan and Ryan Trask made the commitment that they wanted to try this case a third time and do it again because they knew what the evidence was, that's the representation they made to their boss, and that's the decision that was made because they believed in this case.
But then there was a groundswell of supporters for AJ. Things started gaining momentum where people were like, enough is enough. Leave this kid alone. You sent your best prosecutors, you sent all your evidence, you sent hundreds of witnesses, you spent millions of dollars to go after this young man, and you can't get him. Let him go.
After that second trial ended in a hung jury, John Jordan and Ryan Trask made the commitment that they wanted to try this case a third time and do it again because they knew what the evidence was. But in the first trial, the split was 8-4 for guilty, and in the second trial, the split was 8-4 for not guilty. So the prosecutors knew they were facing even more pressure from the court of public opinion to try and make sure they got a verdict in the third trial.
We talked to some of the jurors, and sure enough, they told us the same thing that first jury said. That it's not that we don't believe in the evidence. It's that they didn't want to convict him, knowing the consequences of life imprisonment. That started our strategy for that third trial. We were going to do everything different because a fool does the same thing over and over again. So we were ready for the third trial and presenting our case in a very different way.
We had been to the Armstrong house several times, and one thing that John said to me the last time we went, he said, do you ever notice how narrow walking through this hall would be and how close the staircase is to the doors to the Armstrong's room? And John had a brilliant idea.
When I was a young prosecutor, I happened to actually be in the courtroom watching the Susan Wright trial, where Kelly Siegler brought the bed into the courtroom and demonstrated the crime.
And I attack at the head area first.
When A.J. Armstrong, in his statement to law enforcement that night, says he saw a masked man coming from his parents' bedroom as he was on the stairs, you can see how close in proximity he would have been to this alleged masked man is very important. So how do you do that? Well, you build a staircase.
We are taught at the DA's office to make the crime come alive in front of the jury. We all learn that. When you do that, you put the jury there where they can't avoid seeing what happened.
When we were preparing for trial 3, we had solicited as one of the foremost experts in blood spatter as well as scene reconstruction, Chelly Rossi from the Montgomery County DA's office, who's helped me on cases before. She spent hours to take measurements and pictures. And she came in and she did all the measurements. So that staircase is the exact same dimensions. We placed the staircase away from the end of the jury box so they would see how close in proximity A.J. Armstrong would have been, if you believe his statement, on the staircase to this alleged made-up assailant who had a mask on. And so 2 things would have happened since it's so close, literally 3 feet and 3 inches, is 1, being that close, the assailant would have killed A.J. Armstrong and not allowed a survivor in the home. Or 2,
911, do you need medical, police, or fire?
I heard 2 gunshots downstairs in my pants room.
The very first words out of your mouth when you call 911 immediately afterwards was, "There's a masked man in my house."
Can't run from it was an excellent point by them.
In the very way that the first 2 juries tried to avoid that cold reality of how horrible this crime was, we were not going to let them do it. They were going to have to see it. They were going to have to confront it. Well, now we're going to bring the bedroom into the courtroom. So we set up a mock bedroom.
I thought it was important for the jury to see if there was an unknown intruder that came into the home in the middle of the night to retrieve Antonio Armstrong's firearm, that they would have to come into the bedroom, walk around the king-size bed over to the nightstand, go into the bottom drawer, remove the firearm, assume that it's loaded, come back around to Dawn's side of the bed, and fire 4 shots in the middle of the night. I think that out of all of the assumptions that it was an unknown masked intruder, to do that was just ludicrous.
Reconstructing the bedroom was straight out of the Kelly Siegler playbook. It's effective, but it's like show and lights and smoke and fog and mirrors. I think it was just over dramatic.
When John Jordan started to build out the stairwell and the bedroom, I heard all about it. I got a lot of text messages and phone calls. Guess what Jordan's doing? You know where he's getting it from. So, it makes me proud that he thought to do that.
6 inches in his family.
I've been called dramatic and theatrical a few times in my life, but if it works and a jury understands what we're trying to say, then that's what matters.
After we presented the reconstruction of the crime scene, one of the things we decided to do differently was how we presented the alarm records. In the second trial, we had one representative, an expert from ADT, to explain the alarm.
What we learned in trial 2 is that because the expert from ADT did not understand the software from alarm.com, he did not have answers for some of the things that were being asked of him by the defense attorney on cross-examination. So in trial 3, we now bring the expert that understands all of the alarm records, Jason DeCosta, who was the VP for alarm.com. And we went through for hours, and we went through everything. And he testified to a lot of the things that the defense was trying to say to were errors in the alarm records. He could turn around and say, that's not an error. That's how the alarm records should be reporting. And so he was a great help to us in trial 3, bring the truth to the jury about what the alarm records really meant.
In closing, what I wanted the jury to feel was everything that I've tried to get them to feel in the first 2 trials. Police did a horrible job. They narrowed in on AJ, but I got really aggressive.
This is a reckless prosecution. Only you can stop it. Only you can tell them enough is enough.
In closing argument, I used the alarm records. I tied in how voluminous those records were. And then I showed a text to the jury. It was something that Dawn had sent to her son, AJ, months before her murder. And it said, the alarm doesn't lie, you lie.
After 2 hung juries and an exhausting third trial, the prosecutors are making their final argument to the jury in closing statements.
Because this defendant has the ability to fool everybody, but he couldn't fool Mama.
Towards the end of my closing, since it became a decision for the jury, was it Josh or was it AJ? We ended it with what we truly believed.
I want to end this trial attempting to give a voice to Dawn. You are the only people in our community who, with your verdict, can exonerate my innocent son by holding my guilty one accountable. You could see her saying that.
It has been an emotional 1.5 years. And I told John, if he's not convicted on the evidence we just presented, it will never be good enough.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Antonio Armstrong Jr., guilty.
Our heart goes out to the family. We understand they're going through a lot. It's just their truth is not the truth, but our heart goes out to them because they are victims. Because he was found guilty of capital murder is an automatic life sentence, and because he was 16 at the time of the crime, he'll be eligible for parole in 40 calendar years.
It's the worst moment of my career. It's a complicated emotion in that I know I fought my ass off for him. I gave a lot for that young man, but I still feel like I let him down.
Obviously, the work that all these lawyers did is pretty impressive, to be able to change their strategy based on how it played out in the last trial and move forward and stay so invested in this case speaks a lot to what good lawyers they are.
I think Antonio and Dawn would be proud of their son Josh. I even think they would forgive AJ for what he did because that's the kind of people Antonio and Dawn were. But I know Antonio and Dawn have to be proud of the fact that we're getting the truth.
I think Josh is the ultimate victim of these murders, and to be so compassionate for your family and believe that you are one of them only to see what played out in those trials. I don't know how somebody recovers from something like that.
I'm sure he's seeing the news and seeing how he's being portrayed. Frankly, we think Dawn would have been appalled. And yes, it's two people who never met her, who is going into that courtroom, giving her a voice and holding the truth accountable and exonerating one son by convicting the other. Until the end of my career, I will be very proud of what we did to do that.
With A.J. Armstrong finally being found guilty in the courtroom, I think the hope for all of us is that Josh can walk away knowing in his heart he didn't do anything wrong, and he can go try and live his best life without anybody in his family on his side. And that's going to be really hard for him to do, but I think that all of us really hope that he's able to do that.
To the face. To the face, boy. Right here on the side. Anybody know anything about it? He's one of the DA prosecutors.
Before 2013, only 11 prosecutors in history had ever been killed in the line of duty. This case changed that number to 13. Prosecutors are aware of the risk that comes with the job, but I think the general public doesn't really think that a prosecutor's job is that risky. I remember one time I was working on a case where I was leaving the courthouse late at night by myself, and that particular case involved the defendant who was in a gang. And the gang members were all outside the courthouse cussing me and calling names, and I thought they could shoot me here, they could follow me home, and I was scared that night. But this case went beyond just being scared and threats. This case involved two very well-respected prosecutors who lost their lives, as well as an innocent bystander who was murdered in cold blood. This put prosecutors all over Texas and all over the country on red alert.
Yes, we've got a gentleman on Grove Street and Madison that just got shot.
I know. You got a shot in the face.
I am at the office that morning. I'm sitting at my desk, and I look out the window, and I see two detectives running out to the parking lot. So I called up to dispatch, and I asked, hey, what's going on? The dispatcher told me that they had just had a report of an attorney being shot outside the courthouse.
Come on, buddy. Take your breath.
Upon arrival, there were first responders there that were trying to render aid.
Come on, Mark.
The victim was Mark Hassey from the DA's office.
Come on, buddy. She just possibly shot to the face. To the face, boy. Right here on
We had already started kind of cordoning off the area, creating a crime scene. There were a few witnesses there, and there are officers already conducting searches for evidence.
We found out that a silver sedan had been broadcast as the suspect vehicle. So the focus was find the silver sedan. As we are driving through neighborhoods, I came across one of the ladies that worked in the DA's office, and she was getting out of her car. And I said, "Hey, there's been a shooting." And she looked at me and she's like, "I know, it was Mark." And then she told me that he had died. It was just shock. There's just so many unknowns. We don't know why Mark was targeted, and we don't know who we're looking for other than a silver sedan. And so the schools are getting locked down, the courthouse is getting locked down. It was controlled chaos.
He was a good guy. He didn't deserve that. I met Mark Hasse back in the late 90s. I got a job with the district attorney's office in Dallas County. He was representing someone in a family violence case, but he had been a prosecutor in Dallas County before that for quite some time. He's kind of a nerdy guy. He would almost always have a crazy sweater on. And so they're one of those things that you look for. You see somebody walking down the hall wearing a crazy sweater, you know it's Mark Hasse.
Mark had no spouse. Mark had no kids. Mark had a brother a little older than Mark, and then Mark's mother. That was all the family he had. I was a detective for the sheriff's office when Mark came to work for the Kaufman County DA's office. There were 4 felony prosecutors. Mark was one of them. Working with Mark was an amazing experience. When he found out I had an interest in the law, and he mentored me, he took the time to really delve into the cases with me.
As a prosecutor in Kaufman County, he really, really had a strong sense of justice. He was a warrior.
My phone blew up with prosecutor friends from North Texas, throughout the nation. This really rattled the prosecutorial community.
When prosecutors all across the country heard about Mark Hasse being shot as he walked to the courthouse, every one of us thought, it's got to be related to work. It's got to be somebody he's prosecuted before. It's got to be somebody he made mad because he went after him. The Kaufman County DA's office couldn't take this on. They couldn't be objective. So someone else had to look at this and decide who did it and can we make that case and prove it. So Kaufman County appointed special prosecutors from Dallas County.
We were asked very quickly if me and Toby would consider coming out there to help the investigation.
Bill and Toby were immediately called upon to be special prosecutors, so they were able to get to the crime scene while it was still fresh. That's probably a pretty rare thing to have happen.
So Mark would have parked right here with his truck, and he was facing out, got out of his door and started walking over the block to the courthouse. He gets up to the sidewalk, and halfway through this entry, that's when a silver gray car comes in. A handful of eyewitnesses saw different parts of the encounter, and they described a man dressed in black with a mask. And the man in black gets out and confronts him about right here. And eyewitnesses with the man in the body shop.
But that door's open, he was standing right there. You could see them shoving and Mark saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Mark Hasse shot 5 times.
And the final shot was like right there. And Mark drops, and that's the wound that primarily bleeds out on the parking deal.
This witness saw the shooter pull out another gun and start shooting in the air, probably to frighten everyone away.
You know, it's easy to get away with something in broad daylight if you scare everybody and keep their head down. And then the car flees down here, and our civilian's able to follow him for a few blocks before she loses. And she's on the phone with 911. There's a Kaufman patrol officer a few blocks that way working a burglary. Dash cam picks up the gunshots. He hears them, self-dispatches over here. Parks are about right there, so his dash cam is shooting this way. And you can see the last moments of Mark's life.
We had no casings around here.
Yep.
So we're figuring he had to be a revolver, which means it's somebody that may be familiar with law enforcement because he doesn't want to leave spent shell casings. The DA, Mike McClellan, gave a press conference very quickly after Mark's murder. And I think all of us that were there or watched it were concerned because Mike was so angry. This hit him so personally that he basically issued a challenge to the murderer.
I hope that the people that did this are watching. We're going to find you. We're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in and let the people of Kaufman County prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law.
We knew the killer would be watching somewhere. We were just hoping the killer wouldn't take it as a challenge. Mike was super concerned for the safety of his employees, especially as they went in and out of the courthouse on the town square. He would assign some of his police officers to kind of bodyguard people, walk them in and out. Everyone was extra skeptical of people that came through the metal detectors at the front door.
People from all over the state just started flooding in, rangers and troopers, federal agencies, FBI, DEA, ATF, probably 200 agents in Kaufman working this case at one time.
The fact that a prosecutor was gunned down in broad daylight on the steps of the courthouse, of course they're going to bring in everybody that they possibly can to get to the bottom of who did it.
What makes the murder of a prosecutor so different is the suspect pool. Other than the traditional motives where law enforcement is trained to look, we now have additional suspects, which is any case that Mark Hassey's ever prosecuted. So the clues could be buried in the courthouse. They could be in Mark's office. They could be in his files. We need to go back and reinvestigate Mark's cases.
Mark Hassey was a prosecutor for a very long time, and he was handling the highest profile, most serious cases that Kaufman County had. So it could take them years to get to the bottom of all those cases. The investigation had a lot more work to be done. In the months that followed, Kaufman County is still trying to figure out who killed Mark Hassey.
I was home with my family in Dallas looking forward to Easter Sunday, and I got a call from the police chief of Kaufman that said, "Bill, the sheriff wants you out here. Mike and Cynthia McClellan have been found dead in their home."
I hope that the people that did this are watching. We're going to find you. We're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in.
The district attorney and his wife were killed, and I proceeded straight to the McClellan residence. I locked the scene down.
The immediate assumption was these murders were connected to Mark Hassey. Now we got to figure out what the connection is. We don't know who we're looking for. We don't know if there's other targets. We don't know who's next.
The killer said, "We will not be stopped."
And the black bag was this Grim Reaper mask.
It had a pickle jar full of homemade napalm.
Even though he looks normal, he is a deadly psychopath. As rare as it is to have a prosecutor killed, to have two from the same office killed within 2 months is unprecedented. Mark Hassey's been killed 2 months earlier. This is his boss and his boss's wife. After Mark Hassey's murder, I wouldn't go anywhere without a gun. I was concerned for the safety of my family.
And I told my wife what was happening, and I gave her 2 guns and said, "If you don't know it's me coming through that door, get ready to use these guns," because we were freaked out.
The district attorney and his wife were killed, and we began the methodical process of handling a major crime scene. I didn't see any signs of forced entry. So the door must have been opened to a known party or opened because there was some type of trickery involved. I noticed that there was quite a bit of firearms-related evidence there. Cartridge cases. Based on just the visual survey, it would have been a semi-automatic rifle, .223 caliber. There was damage from bullet impacts to furniture, walls, as well as the 2 bodies of Mr. McClellan and his wife, and they were both shot multiple times.
McClellan crime scene Way too many rounds were fired just to kill 2 people. There were 20 plus rounds fired. It seemed very personal that they probably knew the person that killed them. We were canvassing the neighborhood. We asked, did the neighbors hear the shots? We couldn't find anyone that heard it.
But there was a neighbor a few houses down, and they spotted a white car driving down and then driving back.
This white car is different than the gray sedan seen fleeing Mark Hassey's murder. At this point, the investigators were not sure what to make of that car, but they needed to track it down as soon as possible.
That day, we were all going to meet and go out, and then we got the call later that next day that they had been killed.
I was in shock. I even went so far as to say, okay, y'all, this hasn't really happened. And it wasn't until the funeral home, that it dawns on you that it did happen.
Mike was a fatherly figure in the office, and his wife, Cynthia, would always bring in cookies and baked goods to the office, and very motherly in her interactions with the office staff. When the McClellans were murdered, the enormity of it really hit me. I lost some friends.
The command post opened back up Easter Sunday. We had an anonymous Crime Stoppers tip line. It was web-based, and we got an online tip from someone claiming credit for the murders and said, I shot Mark Hassey and I used a .38 and a .357. That's somebody that has some knowledge that hasn't been released publicly. So we had a pretty good idea that we were interacting with our actual killer.
The email said, do we have your attention? As a show of good faith, have one of the county judges resign by Friday, or the killings will continue. We will not be stopped.
What was really unique about this tip, it was somebody who was fairly sophisticated at that point with the internet. They were using an IP anonymizer.
That's the program for somebody to start masking their identity online. So it makes it more difficult to trace.
So we were not able to track down the person who wrote the tip. To me, the similarities with Mark Hassey and the McClellans were overkill. Mark Hassey's was shot 5 times with the revolver. Mike McClellan was shot 16 times. Cynthia 4 times with a rifle. And it looked personal. They have to be connected. We found out Mark Hassey and his boss, Mike McClellan, only tried 1 case together, and that was in 2012 when they tried Eric Williams. Eric Williams had been tried for the theft and burglary of computer monitors from the courthouse.
Eric Williams had actually been a commissioned police officer, and then he was elected justice of the peace in Kaufman.
Justices of the peace are pretty prevalent in the South. My dad was a JP, and believe it or not, they don't need to be lawyers because Daddy sure wasn't a lawyer. They're elected every 4 years, just like every other government official. They can marry people, but they also deal with traffic tickets, Class C misdemeanors, usually the things where all you have to do is pay a fine. That's what you go see the JP for.
Eric was accused of stealing from the courthouse. Dad approached him and said, hey, resign or I'm going to prosecute this.
He refused. Eric Williams is a very, very smart man, very high IQ. I think he thought he could beat it. And went to trial and he got convicted.
The courthouse surveillance footage of a man stealing, seen here, was used in the criminal court case against former Kaufman County Justice of the Peace, Eric Williams, who was convicted in the theft of computer monitors.
You're a JP who's been prosecuted for any kind of theft. You can lose your license, you can lose your livelihood. That's going to devastate your life.
So we made the decision to try to do a knock and talk on Eric Williams to see if he's involved with the murders. We sent 2 officers over to his house, and in fact, when they knocked on the door and said, can we come in and talk with you? And the lawyer that Eric was, he actually said what he was thinking. He narrated his thoughts. I know I shouldn't, but yeah, guys, come on in.
Did you have anything to do with it? No, absolutely not. If you give us the weapons that you own, and look at your house, make sure there's no weapons there. I mean, I don't think that's asking a whole lot if you didn't do anything.
But that's not going to stop anything. Eric let them in, and they saw pieces of AR rifles in the house.
The type of weapon used at the McClellan's murder. Since he was a convicted felon, he could not have any firearms.
So, based on that knock and talk, we were able to get probable cause to search his house. We went in the house. It looked like somebody that's into computers and is on the internet a lot. Law enforcement did a quick download of his computer searches. He was kind of doing surveillance on Hasse and the McClellans. He was running license plates that were connected with the addresses, neighbors' license plates, trying to get a pattern of life. This eagle-eyed investigator we have found a note in his kitchen. It said, "This looks like a Crime Stoppers password." The Crime Stoppers tip line was web-based. The system itself is set up to be anonymous. However, the person that gives the tip is assigned a unique password. And when we tracked it back, that's how we knew it was Eric Williams that had sent the tips.
We didn't have enough for capital murder charges. So we had this terroristic threat charge that we had enough evidence to be able to lock up Eric.
Eric Williams' motive seemed like it was revenge-driven because of that trial in 2012. We had pieces of AR rifles and his computer searches, but we didn't have cars and weapons to connect Eric Williams to the murders. The next day, my cell phone goes off, and a friend of Eric Williams calls me. He had seen the coverage of the search warrants, and he goes, "I don't know if this is important, but I rented a storage unit for Eric Williams."
I thought, oh my God, it's actually happened. We're going to find something that's linked Eric Williams to those murders.
The command post personnel obtain information from a source that indicates he has rented a storage unit at the request of Eric Williams. So we obtain warrants so that we can enter that storage unit and make a search for evidence that might be related to the murders. There was a lot of stuff crammed into it, but in particular, we found a solid white Crown Vic. It looked like the prototypical law enforcement vehicle. We had received information in the neighborhood that there had been a white vehicle in front of the McClellan's home the morning of their murder. We found law enforcement related memorabilia. We found tons of firearms related evidence, some .38 caliber weapons, quite a bit of boxed ammunition. But what struck me is we found 223 caliber bullets, the same bullets that were fired at the crime scene.
In the storage shed, Eric Williams had ejected a live round into a plastic container, and the tool marks of the ejection site matched the 20 rounds found at the house. That was a smoking gun.
We've got enough now to move forward with capital murder charges. Just the nature of these murders, there's so many moving parts that it was pretty easy for us to believe there had to be more than one person involved. Is there somebody we're missing? People or persons that are guilty of this that haven't hit our radar? Because the eyewitnesses from the Hasse murder saw a second person in the car and the shooter getting in the passenger side. So as we're looking at Eric Williams, we're obviously getting information about his wife, Kim Williams. And what we heard from the locals was Kim has bad arthritis. She hardly leaves the house. She takes lots of medicine. We asked Kim Williams to come down to the sheriff's office. She came down voluntarily, and as a part of that, she voluntarily decided to talk to law enforcement. She was talked to by multiple different officers for a long number of hours. Finally, she broke down and gave us that she and Eric were the killers. And that she was the driver on both murders. And Eric Williams actually pulled the trigger himself. Kim Williams, told us on the McClellan murders that Eric Williams was dressed as a police officer. And that was his plan, to come up as kind of a SWAT officer, knock on the door and say, there's a shooter in the area, let us in, we're here to protect you. And once she decided to finally tell the truth that she and Eric were involved in these murders, she kind of dropped her head and said, you wouldn't understand. And basically told us that Eric's anger at Mark and Mike for the conviction, she shared that anger. This was a pure revenge killing against the people that had prosecuted them.
Because to Kaufman County prosecutors murdered, that entire office can't handle this case. They're conflicted out for all kinds of reasons. You're going to have to call in somebody new who's an outsider. And so Bill and Toby were appointed as special prosecutors for Kaufman County. It's a unique position because it's not your home territory, and you have to learn as quickly as possible to do things their way, at the same time bringing all of the knowledge and experience that got you appointed as a special prosecutor in the first place.
We wanted more information from Kim Williams against Eric Williams. Toby and I talked extensively. You never really trust an accomplice unless you can corroborate them.
They had to tread very lightly in figuring out how to handle her, how to deal with her, and how to use her as a potential witness.
We didn't have the murder weapon from the Mark Hassey murder and from the McClellan murders. So when we talked to Kim, she said Eric Williams threw the guns from the Hassey murder into Lake Tawakoni.
So DPS brought in their dive team.
The lake they were searching was just zero visibility. So it's like fingertip searches by feel, kind of in chocolate milk. They were out there probably 30 days total, spread over almost a year of searching. We were hours away from abandoning the search. We're never going to find anything when we got the phone call that the dive team had found guns and a phone. When the guns and the phone came up out of Lake Tawakoni, they were in a black bag. And we didn't think much of the black bag until we dried it out. And the black bag was this Grim Reaper mask. So it had the guns that were used to kill Mark Hassey contained in the killer's mask.
Eric Williams wanted his face disguised from the witnesses, but he also wanted Mark Hassey to be able to recognize exactly who was about to kill him. And that's when witnesses heard Hassey say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, right before he was shot by Eric Williams.
So we knew Kim Williams was at least telling us the truth because everything she told us was corroborated with physical evidence.
Bill and Toby decided to try Eric and Kim Williams separately. When you are trying Eric Williams, from the beginning it's pretty apparent you're going to need to seek the death penalty because he killed 2 prosecutors. And his wife is also involved, but as a lesser player, and you're not going to seek the death penalty on her. If you're not going to seek death on both of them, they are never going to be tried together. Their trials are always going to be separate.
We had 3 murders and 2 separate incidents. So we put a lot of thought and we went to prosecute the McClellan murders first. Eric Williams' beef was with Mark and Mike. He shot Mark in public by himself. He could have done the same thing to Mike. Instead, he chose to kill Mike at home, knowing Cynthia would be a witness. There was absolutely no reason for Cynthia McClellan to die. So we wanted to try that case first because it was a very strong case for the death penalty.
They charged him with capital murder because they broke into the house. Burglary plus murder equals capital murder. With Mark Hassey, you have to prove the whole retaliation part of it to charge him with capital murder, which is another layer that you have to prove. With the McClellans, you didn't have to even go into that.
There's circumstantial evidence, forensic evidence, fingerprint evidence, ballistic evidence, and finally you will hear a confession. A confession this man made to the murders. He sent an email into law enforcement claiming credit for the murders, thinking he would remain anonymous. Well, he was wrong.
When I did the initial opening statement and I termed that email into Crime Stoppers a confession, He got very agitated at the table and was trying to stare me down. But that's because he's a psychopath with a huge ego that thinks he's smarter and he can get himself out of any situation.
Because he'd gotten away with 3 murders. During the trial. But I went very methodically through the evidence, and the 2 key points were the emails about Mark Hassey's murder, where he said the killings will continue. We knew it came from Eric Williams because he left that password for the tip line. The other was the physical evidence found in the storage shed and at the McClellan house.
What conclusions were you able to draw after examining that live cartridge?
That the marks on the case of this cartridge indicate that it was cycled in the same firearm that fired all of the cartridge cases recovered from the crime scene.
We didn't find the actual murder weapon, but it was as good as finding the murder weapon.
We didn't call him Kim Williams because anytime you call an accomplice or a co-defendant in front of a jury, it's an easy cross for a defense lawyer to say Kim Williams was the shooter and not the driver. And we just didn't want to open up that can of worms. We were blessed with so much circumstantial evidence. I asked the jury to consider this. If it's not Eric Williams, then who would it be? No one else fits. No one else has motive. No one else is the common denominator. We felt our case was strong. But anytime you're in front of a jury, you can get somebody that just doesn't want to deliberate. You can get a hung jury 11-1. So something can still go wrong. But the defense in this case was so hamstrung, most of the witnesses were not cross-examined. So they kind of saved their defense fireworks for the closing argument.
Not one fingerprint, not one piece of DNA.
There's no burden on the defense to put on a single witness. The whole burden is on the state of Texas to prove the case.
There is no known murder weapon in this case. That is the core of the state's indictment, that Eric Williams went into the home and shot Cynthia McClellan.
When you have a case like this where the evidence is so strong and so compelling, the only argument you usually are going to be able to make is reasonable doubt. Can a jury say, based on this evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt, Eric Williams is the person who killed the McClellans?
It's like a net. You piece it all together, and it tracks Eric Williams. We have proven this case beyond a reasonable doubt, and we'll ask you for that verdict.
Right before the verdict came back, Eric Williams looked very, very confident. He sat over there with a smirk on his face the entire trial.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Eric Lyle Williams, guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment. You may be seated.
And I think when he heard that the jury found him guilty, it just kind of deflated him. I think he was so delusional, he thought he was going to walk away.
The guilty verdict was a relief. There was a sense of comfort, like, okay.
It was the next phase. That was the nerve-wracking part of it all, is whether he was going to get the death penalty or not.
The challenge here for Bill and Toby was, would a jury give Eric Williams the death penalty? Because you're talking about not your usual capital murder defendant. He was an elected official. He was a justice of the peace. He was law enforcement. He worked for the people of Kaufman County for a number of years, and everybody thought he was a good guy. So are you going to give somebody like that the death penalty, or is life without parole a good enough punishment? Bill and Toby have to prove, in order to get the death penalty in this case, two things: that Eric Williams is a future threat to society, and is there anything in his life that mitigates or makes you think that, okay, because of that circumstance in his life, a life sentence is good enough, that's appropriate enough to deserve that over the death penalty?
Eric Williams was a Mensa member, so they couldn't say he was mentally challenged in any way. He was raised by two parents in a nice home out in the country. He's given every chance in the world. You know, he had a good job as a justice of the peace. So really, what was the mitigation going to be?
Eric Williams looks like every man. And in fact, we made it very clear to the jury that even though he looks normal, he is a deadly psychopath. We actually put on the contents of that storage unit and his massive gun and tactical fantasy collection just so the jurors could get a glimpse into the mind of Eric Williams. He wasn't this successful lawyer, judge. He was really a violent, dangerous person, and whenever anything went wrong in his life, people were going to pay. Plus, in the punishment phase, we can put in past crimes, bad acts, anything we think might be relevant to helping the jurors.
Take your seats, witness stand.
We were able to track down a girlfriend from 1995.
And he said, I have a gun. I have nothing to lose.
Take your seats, witness stand.
During the punishment phase of the trial, the prosecutors called Janice Gray to the stand to talk about an incident that happened to her back in 1995 after she and Eric Williams broke up.
We went to I don't know, I guess it was a sports bar type. We had a small conversation about me wanting, to have another relationship. It wasn't anything big. And he said, well, I have a gun. If you walk away, I'll use it. I have nothing to lose. I was maybe shocked, maybe scared that I just stood there.
What Bill and Toby were trying to do is show with Janice Gray, this was just another step in a line of violence that Eric Williams committed. It didn't just begin and end with what happened to Mark Hassey and the McClellans. It started way before that. And that Bill and Toby are showing the jury, you think you know him because he was our Justice of the Peace in Kaufman County. You don't know him at all.
And then we called Kim Williams to the witness stand.
The defense was nervous. They didn't know when we were going to call Kim Williams. You could see the defense lawyers like, is she ever going to come? Because they didn't want her.
Are you guilty of these capital murders?
Yes, I am.
Do we have any deal?
No, we do not.
Did you pull the trigger in these murders?
No, I did not.
Who did?
Eric Williams. He was mad at Mark Hassey. He was mad at Mr. McClellan.
Who did he bear the most animosity towards?
Mark Hassey. Because he prosecuted him.
What was to be your role in the murders?
He wanted me to drive. I so believed in Eric and everything that he told me. His anger was my anger.
I think her testimony was just ice cold at how they plotted this revenge, they planned it.
One of the things that was so compelling and cold was how the night before they were going to murder the McClellans, Eric would model his different law enforcement uniforms like a runway. He would come in and change out. What do you think of this or this one? And his plan was to talk his way in. He was going to say, hey, there's an emergency, you're in danger, I need to come in.
Once he goes into the McClellan home, what happens next?
I hear shots.
How many?
A lot.
What did he tell you about killing Cynthia McClellan?
That she had to die because she would be there as a witness, and he described it as collateral damage.
Kim provided a real glimpse into the sickness that was their life together. She talked about how they went to celebrate after a murder.
How do you and Eric spend the rest of the day, the Saturday before Easter Sunday?
Cooking out.
Were y'all celebrating with steaks?
That's correct.
What was the mood like at the cookout?
Happy. Joyous.
The big piece that we really needed for her in a death penalty trial, we had heard about a potential hit list. And I think in our mind, we were thinking maybe it was written down. When we talked to Kim, she said, no, it wasn't written down. It was just a list that we talked about. In order to get the death penalty, we needed that hit list in to prove that Eric Williams was a future danger.
After the McClellans were killed, were there more on the hit list?
Yes.
Who was that?
Early Wiley.
And who else?
Judge Ashworth.
They were next to be killed by Eric Williams?
Yes.
Lots of items were recovered from that storage shed, and one strange item was a backpack, and it had a crossbow and had like a pickle jar full of some weird liquid. They tested it, and it was homemade napalm. That was going to be very compelling evidence for the penalty phase.
After the McClellans died, who was going to be next?
Judge Ashworth.
Why did he tell you he wanted to kill Judge Ashworth?
He told me that Judge Ashworth was prissy, a prima donna. He got mad all the time at Eric.
Where was the murder supposed to take place?
At his home.
With the crossbow?
That's correct.
What was the napalm for?
I guess to drive in an extra kind of FU. He's going to bore a hole in his stomach and pour it in.
Why are you cooperating with law enforcement? Why are you here testifying against your husband?
Because those families deserve this, and I want to give it to them.
At the conclusion of final argument, the jury is sent out to deliberate, and after the jury deliberated for just a little bit, the judge sent the jury home, so everybody in the courtroom went home wondering what the verdict was going to be.
Anytime you've got a jury out and they go home for the night, that's a long night for the lawyers involved, no matter what side you're on. So maybe started second guessing ourselves, because if we don't give him the death penalty, he's going to keep killing. He's smart enough to be a danger behind bars, too. When we came back the next day, almost immediately they had a verdict.
Mr. Williams, the jury having found you guilty of the offense of capital murder in this court to carry out the sentence of death.
Was death. I think it was just an overwhelming sense of relief. Lawyers don't high-five after big verdicts. The community didn't high-five on this case. It was just relief that maybe we can try to get back to our normal life.
It's not it makes everything better kind of feeling once they came back with the death sentence. People talk about it being a closure. There is no closure.
That's not going to bring Dad back. It's not going to bring Cynthia back. It's not going to bring Mark Hassey back. You're still dealing with life without them. We were proud in the Kaufman County Sheriff's Office, and Bill and Toby both did a great job. We couldn't have handpicked anybody better to stand up there and be the prosecutors. Those guys were top notch.
After Eric Williams' conviction and death sentence, we sat down with all the family members involved in law enforcement, and we got feedback from everyone involved. Of course, in the run-up to Eric's trial, everyone wanted the death penalty for Kim Williams, including the families. But they were present in the courtroom for Kim's testimony and saw how devastating it was and what a huge role it played in the death penalty for Eric Williams, that they actually had a little bit of mercy and forgiveness in their heart. We ultimately let her plead guilty to 40 years behind bars. So that's the sentence she's currently serving.
I never tried a death penalty case where I knew the victims.
This was the first time that I felt pursuing my passion, prosecuting murder cases, would somehow jeopardize my loved ones and my family.
It was very personal in that way, and also you felt like you were fighting for the criminal justice system. If you're going to make lawyers targets, then you will have to pay for it.
Mike and Mark lost their lives because of their jobs. And I know we don't typically think of line of duty deaths involving prosecutors, but that's because they're so rare. I do consider it a line of duty death, and I'm glad their service is kind of honored in that way.
I want people to realize and never forget the victims. The name of the person that committed these murders will be in the history books forever. But the 3 people that he killed were wonderful people, and I want their memories to be carried on.
Every day of their lives, they did stuff together. There wasn't a time that he wasn't there and she wasn't there. They were always together doing something.
I hope people remember the determination of our father and how he didn't quit and how he was bullheaded, but he loved everybody.
Mark Hassey stood up for what he believed in,
and he paid the price for it. The man who would bring justice for other victims had justice brought for him.
When you take your oath, your job is, as a prosecutor, to seek justice. People don't really think of the prosecutors being the one who keeps the streets safe, but ultimately, if you do your job right, that is what you're doing. When you hear about the elected DA and his main assistant being murdered in Kaufman County, that was a huge reminder to all of us that it's a risky job.